everybody, and welcome back to an exciting day. We are finally doing the structuralist analysis of Dracula today. I have been really wanting to do this to the point where I was thinking about actually putting off some of the things that I really needed to do last week, but I was good. I did the things that I really needed to do, so now I can do the fun thing, which is doing this structuralist analysis. So just as a really quick update conversation point, I am not going to be getting into the weeds to explain structuralism from the more foundational, like how it works thing. I've already done a vlog about that. It came out before this. If you are wanting to know what the hell I'm talking about, go check out my structural anthropology explained video. That's where I actually talk a lot about the theory behind this and the more general kind of conceptions of what I'm doing. I will be talking through the more like specifics of what I'm doing, but if you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, hopefully that video helps to explain it. If you have seen that video and you still don't understand things, just leave a comment and I'll figure it out, because I sometimes don't really know how things translate. So anyway, point is, today we are doing a structuralist analysis and I'm very excited. So where did I put Dracula? Oh, there it is. So there are a couple of things that I have on me that are going to be useful for this beginning bit. And that is obviously Dracula. However, it is, you know, several hundred pages. Having to flip through it in order to actually get some basics is not going to be super helpful. So when I was doing my, there we go. So when I was doing my Gothic study from last quarter, one of the things that I did was I actually did like book notes for the books that I read. So I have a synopsis. This is The Vampire, for example. I've got a synopsis of the actual plot, and then I've got like thoughts on the themes and stuff like that. So I also have that for Dracula. So I'm going to be actually using the synopsis that I wrote as kind of a basis at the beginning, and then once I start wanting to complicate it, that's when I can get more into the actual book. I don't know how much I'm going to do the complication bit today. As I said in the explanation video, with structuralism, it's a lot of experimentation. So it's a bit of needing to kind of trial things out, do stuff over here, figure things out, and then step away from it for a while and then come back. So this is only going to be part one, where I'm going to kind of do those initial stages. Some of the things that I think about in part one might not exist in the final element. It is, like I said, an experiment. It's a way to kind of see what I'm feeling. I might change my mind later on. I might find something better. That's just kind of how this goes. The first time I did a structuralist analysis of Slender Man, one of the things that I really used was a whiteboard. I really liked to kind of make all of my notes and then take a picture of it if I wanted to keep the thoughts, and then I erased it and started over. It was just a way of like arranging things and then moving on. With Stranger Things, when I did that one, it was a shorter study, kind of like this one's going to be a shorter study. So I just did it in a notebook, and so I just had pages and pages of like rando notes and scribblings and stuff. This time I wanted to try something a little different, and I have note cards. I have some in different colors as well, and just index cards. So what I'm thinking of doing is using these to note my myth themes, which are the smallest element of a myth. Then I can kind of move them around. I'm gonna try doing my floor, which I'm only just now realizing I probably should have vacuumed. Oops. But anyway, so I'm gonna try moving those around. If I find it annoying, then I might move to the desk. It's just if I go it immediately to the desk, I'm gonna have to like completely clear my desk of everything, and I do need to do work this afternoon, so it would be nice if I don't have to worry about that. But I'm also old, so leaning over on the floor is not exactly ideal, but we're gonna see how it goes. I do also have somewhere just like a regular notebook to jot some stuff down, so I can kind of move around if needed. So anyway, let's scribble the myth themes at my desk first, and then we'll move to floor cam. So, as I am about to start actually doing this, I thought I'd explain very briefly as to what the hell you're going to be looking at. So I have, as I briefly showed over there, these are color coded just to make things easier for me. These are all of the semi-relevant things. I might be adding to these piles as I go, and particularly as I re-flip through Dracula to remind myself. But these are the important kind of things. So I've got like mist, animals, garlic, stuff like that. Things that kind of come up as relevant items in the story. These are relevant characters. So I have all of the suitors. I have Lucy, Lucy's mom, Mina, Jonathan, Dracula. I even have the 3 female Draculas that are in the castle, just because I think those might be relevant. And then these are places. So I have some of them that are more broad, like England and Transylvania, and then I have more specific, so like Dracula's castle and Whitby and stuff like that, because I think, again, they're going to be related, but sometimes in the book it just says England and it doesn't maybe specify where specifically. Sometimes it's like through Transylvania. I didn't put Budapest on there, even though there is a section in Budapest, but actually that might be relevant, because isn't that where Mina and Jonathan get married, is in Budapest? Hold on. Budapest. Okay. Anyway. Anyway, so these are all the things. So normally what you would do at this stage is basically what I'm going to be doing is just kind of moving things around where they all relate to one another. So for example, Jonathan and Mina got married in Budapest. They're going to be kind of related. Jonathan moved from England to Budapest to Transylvania, back to Budapest, back to England. So Budapest is like this middle ground, something like that. We know that, for example, animals are associated with Dracula. We're gonna kind of be moving things around in that sense and kind of seeing what stuff looks like, really. Now, normally with structuralism, what you would be doing is picking what's called a key myth. So this would be one story that then you are kind of using as your first one. There's nothing really all that like important about a key myth. It's just simply your first entry in it. That's all it is, and that's kind of can be up to you. With the book Dracula, as I mentioned, it is kind of odd because I think it is probably a bit longer than you would normally pick for a key myth, but it's not quite as long as like a full thing. So for example, if we were to do the Odyssey, I think I do have a copy of the Odyssey. Does not matter. So if we were doing the Odyssey, for example, we would probably do one of the stories in it rather than doing the whole thing, and then you would slowly work your way through and then see what happens. Dracula is kind of short enough to not necessarily need to do all that, but too long to feel like I can do it all at once. So what I'm thinking about doing is kind of only doing the first very small section of the text, which is, I think I'm gonna go until about Mina and Jonathan getting married. So that's gonna be about the first 100 pages. We're gonna do that bit first, I think, and just kind of see, and then maybe tackle another one after that, just to kind of, because then it gets more complicated. So we're gonna kind of see how that is, but I do need to kind of pick it as one full myth, but I think there's just so many elements, as you can see, that it might be smart to do a small bit of it first and then build on that. So we're gonna start chronologically in the book. I think that makes the most sense, of the bit of Jonathan in Transylvania, because I think then it can be juxtaposed quite nicely with Dracula in England. So I think that's how we're gonna do it. Hello. Okay. I think I have the startings of a structure, but let me show you my notes so I can tell you what I'm thinking. So I overly simplified from this. I also took a whole load of I basically take pictures of it as I go when I move things around. I'm gonna flash some of those up on the screen just so you can kind of see the various forms that this has taken. But this is where we're at right now, because basically I think the idea that I have is, so as I mentioned in my kind of description of structuralism, Levi Strauss likes to use formulas. So I think the way that he would describe this would be like A plus B or something. I don't like it. So I use diagrams. So this is what I'm thinking so far, just as a quick drawn out thing. So basically there's typically two primary categories that things fit in, and then there is overlap, so people can move from one to the other or coming back. But this middle isn't like sustainable. It's not a category in and of itself, so the stories have to resolve. You can't leave something here in the middle. Basically, the kind of simplified version that I have right now of those kinds of two primary overlapping categories is the very simplified life-death, right? So you have life in one category, death in the other, and so then the undead would be in the middle. So the problem of the story is the fact that we have undead. So we have something in the middle category, and that's kind of what makes Dracula monstrous, is the fact that he is in the middle of two categories that should theoretically not have overlap, which is why I'm thinking you've got life in one category, death in the other, and they don't cross. So you move to death and then that's it. You are either alive or you are dead, and as soon as you transfer category, you completely transfer. So there is no movement back and forth between those categories. But here we have movement. So I'm trying to decide whether it would be where's my diagram again? But whether it's two categories overlapping or whether it would be like two separate categories that don't overlap and Dracula is just kind of a floater in the middle. But I think it's like this, just based off of some of the other diagrams I was throwing together, but I think I needed a bit of a more simplistic look first. So I think that now I can explain this a little bit better. So let me show you. So I've only used Jonathan and Mina at the moment, but basically anybody who's alive, so like Seward and Morris and Holmwood would probably fit in this category of life. In the middle for undead, obviously we have Dracula and the three female vampires. And then in death, we currently don't have anybody, but throughout the story, people move into this category. So for example, Lucy. Lucy starts in life, Dracula makes her undead, and then they solve the problem and firmly kill. By the end of the story, Dracula and the three vampires move over here to resolve, and because they are gone, the sleepwalking also goes away, which means that the issue of the middle category is fully resolved. In Levi Strauss's conception of mythology, a story must resolve its mediators. So this is a mediator. So Dracula being in here is a mediator. We don't like the mediator. It causes problems for us. And so what makes the story a kind of finalized story is the fact that the mediation is resolved. There is now no longer anything in the middle. This can also be related to some of the other stuff. So for example, sleepwalking is kind of in between awake and death. So sleeping is kind of seen as a middle ground, and then moving around while sleeping is kind of akin to undead. We have Earth. The fact that Dracula has to travel in Earth, I think, kind of connects him to life. Earth is typically associated with vegetation, so life-giving things. Blood, I put the blood transfusions here, but I think blood in general is more akin to life. But then over here we've got the tomb and the grave, obviously more associated with death. And then I put feeding here because I think of feeding as a much more like taking. So you are removing life even though it gives life. So I'm not really sure where to fit this, to be honest. I had it in here, but I'm not really sure. I'm not positive about feeding. But we can take this conception also in terms of locations. So just in terms of places, for example, we have, there we go. We have England, Budapest, and Castle Dracula. Again, don't ignore the life, death, undead. I'm just showing these as the 3 overlapping categories. So we have England kind of on one side and then Castle Dracula on the other. And in order to travel from one to the other, you have to pass through Budapest. It's kind of this kind of, in the book, I should stress, in the book, it is written as kind of almost like the last bit of quote-unquote civilization, which is a whole nother aspect as well, which we'll talk about. But we have, say, Dracula here, and we have Jonathan here, and Mina is here, as well as other people, but we're gonna leave it like that. And then essentially, Jonathan moves from here to Budapest to here, and then he becomes trapped, right? So he's stuck here. Dracula, though, is able to move. Jonathan is stuck. He has to come here, but he can't fully move over to this on his own. Mina has to come from this section over and then bring him over to there, which is kind of akin to the idea of blood transfusions. Is its life being given to undead in order to pull back to the life category. So it seems like you can move from this to this to this, but it requires effort from this category in order to pull over. It's not as easy of a transition to go from here to here as it is from here to here. So I think we've got the start of something. I had some more like complicated endeavors. As I mentioned, the whole thing with civilization. So I was thinking about it in terms of to the very last sentence of the book. Oh, by the way, spoilers for Dracula. But the last sentence of the book is, "And to our bitter grief, with a smile and in silence, he died a gallant gentleman," which I think is this really fascinating take, because there was also like this shifting of understanding of Dracula throughout the book. So at the beginning, Dracula is kind of conceived of as this kind of upper crust gentleman. He's well learned, he's polite. What's the phrasings I used in here? He's well educated and hospitable. However, he traps Jonathan and makes Jonathan a prisoner at the same time. And he's also quite animalistic. He crawls out of windows in like a weird animal thing and like scuttles down the side in this really rad fashion. And then Jonathan just looks at it and goes, "Oh." The beginning of the book is wild. So Dracula's kind of this strange figure where Jonathan seems unable to place him, but he at least appears like a gentleman. But then as the book goes on, they start to treat him more and more like an animal, which again is why this whole like sexy Dracula thing drives me bonkers, because he's an animal. He's treated as an animal, not as sexy. I think a gentleman is sexy, but not, I don't know, maybe that reveals more about me. Trying to find the sections where Mina was helping the men out, because I was trying to figure out whether I could organize the 2 primary female characters. But I ended up putting that to the side because there's a whole conversation that Van Helsing is having with Jonathan and Mina, and trying to convince them to like talk out their thoughts, because they seemed kind of hesitant to do so because they didn't want to seem stupid, basically. But he's like, go ahead. And he says, Jonathan says, "Then as he is a criminal, he is selfish, and as his intellect is small and his actions is based on selfishness, he confines himself to one purpose. That purpose is remorseless." And so I think there is a certain amount of, therefore, kind of intellect being small in regards to Dracula. Like, he's not thinking in the same kind of well-educated way as he was in the castle, which could be because he's moved categories, he's lost something of himself from the previous, or it's that the education is different than the civilized, so intellect being, again, I'm doing a lot of these just so you don't know, you know, the more like civilized aspects is kind of different than education necessarily. Intellect and education are two separate things. Van Helsing is kind of representative of the massively intellectual, while Dracula is kind of the animalistic, kind of acting purely out of selfish drive. There's something also really interesting about Whitby being on the sea with cliffs, but then also there's like ruins of a church plus a graveyard. It's kind of earth meets sea. It's a very good like barrier location, right? Like a boundary marker in a way. I am back. I am back at desk. What I am thinking of doing at this point is, there's still a lot of things that I haven't quite sorted out. This is very much a first step. It is currently 10 a.m. Ooh, I only realized that I just realized I forgot to eat breakfast. What I'm thinking of doing is, all of my notes right now are in photos and scribbled things. And so what I might do is try to put all of this, all of these and all of the photos that I took into some semblance of order on my computer, just so that way if I come to visit it later, I know what I was thinking. I can kind of sort through it. It'll involve a lot of typing and explanation and notes and drawings and diagrams. But I think it'll be just useful for future Vivian. So I'm gonna do that now, I think. And then I'm gonna see what time it is at that point, as well as some of the other things that I have to do today in order to decide whether or not we are kind of ending this part 1 here or whether we're going to tackle some more elements of it. So, but let's try to put my thoughts into actual organized thought. I think that's what we do. Good morning. It is a different day, if you couldn't tell. I was thinking about going back after the last like little run up. I meant to. I didn't. So I was going to actually like wrap up this whole vlog and just kind of consider it done because I didn't go back, and then I realized I never really finished my thoughts on anything. Yeah, so I thought that maybe I would spend today kind of wrapping up my thoughts on this first step of this. As I said, structuralism is a process. And so I am not finished with the structural analysis of Dracula. This is just part 1, but I wanted to kind of summarize a little bit about what I have done so far, what I think about it, and what the next steps are. So basically what I have done up to this point is, if we remember the kind of narrative levels that I talked about in the kind of structural anthropology 101, or if this is the first time you're hearing it, in structuralism, we think about narratives as having kind of levels to it. So there's the narrative level, which is all of the words, and then all the other things are the underlying structure that we're kind of diving into. Where I'm at right now is like just beginning to chip away at that first S3 level. I'm not very deep into it. As I said, the vast majority of what I'm probably going to get to, if I manage to get to it, is S2. I don't believe that S1 exists personally, so S2 is as deep as I can possibly go, but I'm probably going to be hanging out in the S3 level for a while, which means that a lot of what I'm talking about stays on the categorical named levels. In other words, the structure that I found so far, that I think I found, I should specify, is relating to the life-death situation. Now, I don't like using formula. Levi Strauss really loved using formula. I'm not a big fan of it because I never could get my mind around it. But for me, I like using like diagrams. I think that what I have found so far is a relationship in between life and death that is reflected in the narrative of Dracula, which has the category of life overlapping with the category of death. Now, when we draw it with these kind of overlapping, very Venn diagram circles, what that is signifying is the fact that characters, items, things, whatever, are capable of moving between those two categories. So someone can move from life to death and then also back from death to life, which is obviously something that is going on in Dracula because you have the undead. However, there is an issue with this crossing. The things that are moving between and have transitioned in these categories, particularly from death to life, are seen as inherently negative. They are monsters, right? These are the things that shouldn't happen. So the undead is kind of that little overlapped middle category. And we see an attempt to drag life back. So Dracula takes Lucy, for example, from the life category towards the death category, ends up actually bringing her to full death category. But when she's in that in-between stage, there is an attempt to bring her back to the life by doing blood transfusion, which is a giving of the life to the dead as a way of trying to move them back into the life category. It doesn't work. She moves fully onto the death category, and they don't want her to become the undead category, although I think she does. She ends up feeding on a child, and then they're like, well, this isn't good, so then they have to go and finally remove her fully from the dead category. So they move her from the middle undead to dead. So with Levi Strauss, a lot of his thoughts on myth was that myth presents us with mediators and issues that shouldn't exist. So an issue in the categorical system that then eventually gets resolved, because obviously when we go through life, not everything fits neatly into categories. So he believes that mythology is one of the things that teaches us how to deal with the things that don't fit into neat boxes and how to handle them. In the case of Dracula, we are solving it by firmly resolving to the death category or the life category. The overlap shouldn't happen. They should be essentially two not overlapping circles, but they are overlapping because there is transition possible. In this case, Dracula works as a kind of mediator figure. So mediators are figures who help to facilitate the transition between categories. Lucy only moves categories because of Dracula. However, it needs to be resolved in order to keep the transitioning from continuously happening. And that is why they resolve to firmly kill Dracula, so he is no longer in the middle category and therefore unable to facilitate continual movement between the categories. But this kind of still fits on the level of S3, and the reason why we know this is on the level of S3 is because I'm still utilizing a lot of the same language and categories and words that were chosen in the story. So the mythemes were those small elements of the story. We have the things that were on these note cards. I'm still using these. If we were to try to take this to an S2, we would essentially start removing those mythemes and seeing it as a much more broader categorical system. But in order to do that, I have to verify that this works when we're not talking about just life and death, but we're talking about other things. So I think that this kind of initial standpoint, categories of life and death, and the movement therein, and the undead in the middle, is actually a really good starting point. Where I am thoughtful is how much this is going to hold up in other elements of the book, because theoretically this structure should underpin the entirety of the culture or the story, right? The story more generally, the culture more broadly. And so something else, some other part of the story should still fit this. That's something that I still need to do. Renfield himself is an interesting kind of position that I don't really know where he fits on the category. Potentially the idea of insanity could be itself in between because of the treatment of the insane as being essentially apart from the living. So it is anything that is kind of seen as kind of half dead anyway, which I think is also a statement on the way that we kind of view mental illness. And I would say that we used to, but I think we still do to a large extent. Yeah, so I think there's just a lot of questions still that I have, but I just wanted to kind of wrap up today by having a little bit more of an actual conversation about the structure that is slowly unfolding before me. I'm not going to say that what I have right now is the structure. I am feeling positive about it. It's a structure that I am used to seeing, particularly in terms of Western culture. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is it, but I am trying not to have my own biases and expectations kind of paint an idea of what I'm finding. I want to just find it and test it without those expectations and biases in my brain. I'm finding this very exciting. I'm very tempted to continue to reread Dracula. I already obviously did it for my personal curriculum last term, and now I'm tempted to go through it again, but with this process in mind. It's just, I don't know if I have time to sit and read a fourth book or something that I have to read right now. Oh, one last question mark that I have is the role of diary entries. So this is really fascinating to me actually, because I dealt with diary entries as a way of telling stories when I did my research on the Slender Man. It was this kind of same epistolatory storytelling, but just online and in forums. And the format that these stories took became actually a really important part of the discovery of the structure. And so I am interested in the role that the letters and diary entries are serving in this. Especially because I also know that it was quite common for books to be written in this style. I mean, obviously Frankenstein is also written in this style. There's many, many, many books that are written in this style. It was not abnormal, particularly for this time period, but that would actually go to prove the whole point, because the idea of structuralism is that it's underlying a culture. So we could theoretically sit here and do a structural analysis, not just of Dracula, but of all 19th century Gothic English literature, and we would theoretically find the same structure across all of them, because they would all be English 19th century Gothic literature. So that's kind of theoretically what would happen. Are we going to do that? I don't know, man, maybe. Yeah, I just wanted to sit and have a lengthy chat where I wrapped up some of my thoughts because I realized I kind of just left it very open without any kind of discussion as to like what I found or why that matters or what's going on with this. I wanted to explain it a little bit better because sometimes when I'm in the moment of doing the analysis, it's hard for me to stop and like explain everything because I'm just too wrapped up in my own thought processes. And anyway, that was part 1 of my Dracula structuralist analysis. As I said, we are only just starting to crack the surface and I'm really excited to keep going. I still have a load of questions. I still have a load of myth themes that I want to sort out. It is a process. I might change my mind on literally everything I talked about today. That's part of the fun of structuralism. So we're going to kind of just see how it goes. This is where I'm at right now, and I'm excited to find out more. I hope this is of interest to you. I hope that you are learning a lot about structuralism or making you think a little bit more about Dracula. If you have any thoughts about any of the things that I was talking about or finding or discussing today, please do let me know. It gives me food for thought. So we'll kind of see when I can get around to this again, but hopefully next week or 2 weeks time, which might be another 2 to 3 weeks for you, but stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, do all the YouTube. I never tell you to do the YouTube things, so I hope you just do them. Like, do the subscribing and the liking and all that kind of stuff, because I always forget to tell you, and apparently me actually saying it does change what happens. You guys have been around on the internet, you've been around on YouTube, you know what you're supposed to be doing. I shouldn't have to tell you. But anyway, I am going to shut up. I will be back soon with more structural analysis and see if I am just wrong about literally everything I just said. Won't that be fun? Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.